It's been a dramatic few days in Russia. A mercenary march on the capital has been headed off, but not before throwing Vladimir Putin's iron grip on the country into question. And it all centres on the movements of the mercenary force, the Wagner Group. It is a private military company of sorts. Previously, it's worked alongside Russia's main military force in conflict zones like Syria, but has also provided security and helped train armies in Africa. In Europe, it's played a major part in the war in Ukraine. And its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is behind the weekend's unrest. So here's how it unfolded. It starts with a series of messages where Prigozhin labels Russia's military leadership evil and accuses the defense minister of orchestrating a deadly attack on his mercenaries. That claim remains unconfirmed. Wagner fighters then march out of Ukraine and back into Russia, entering the southern city of Rostov-on-Don, a crucial military base for operations in Ukraine. Stunned residents watch on as heavily armed mercenaries, backed by tanks and armoured vehicles, surround government buildings and patrol the streets. In the hours later, Vladimir Putin addresses the nation, calling it a betrayal and vowing to crush the rebellion.
What we are facing now is treason. Personal ambitions have led to treachery.
But Yevgeny Prigozhin and his Wagner fighters aren't deterred. They say they're marching for justice and begin moving towards Moscow. Russian authorities race to create roadblocks with excavators digging into the highway in an attempt to slow their advance.
They were effectively waved through checkpoints. They faced very little resistance. And for Putin, I think this must be really, really troubling.
And this is how far they got. From Rostov-on-Don, the mercenaries travelled along the M4 highway through Voronezh, getting as far north as Elets. But when they are within 200 kilometres of the capital, Prigozhin suddenly calls for them to turn around and return to their bases. Behind the back down is a deal brokered by the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko. Under the agreement, the Wagner boss will be exiled to Belarus and no charges will be brought against him or his forces in Ukraine.
I do think that this is at the very least the beginning of the end for Vladimir Putin. He has effectively blinked in the face of Prigozhin driving towards the capital. Whether it takes days, weeks, months or even a year, I think the writing is now on the wall for him.
Well, for more on these extraordinary events, let's bring in our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons. Is the writing on the wall for Vladimir Putin, John?
I think so, Ros. I think yesterday, the events of the weekend is the beginning of the end for him. We don't know. It could be weeks, months, could be a year. But it showed all of his enemies, and he has many there. If you've been a dictator in power on and off for 23 years, you have a lot of enemies. He's dispatched a lot of generals, a lot of national security advisors. A lot of the oligarchs are out to get him because their money has been frozen. Their yachts and their assets have been frozen. A lot of the oligarchs are unhappy with him. They have their own private armies. So I think what will be happening now behind the scenes is you'll see Putin and co, I think, working out their forces, and you'll see Prigozhin and others working out who they can deliver. It's a bit like it's sort of a battle of the factions. In fact, the former world chess champion Garry Kasparov, Russian, of course, knows the country, had a wonderful sort of comment the last few hours. Don't wonder what will happen if Russia collapses. It already did years ago. It's not a state, it's a mafia front with factions fighting each other for money, resources and power. And he added that Prigozhin and Putin don't care about bloodshed, not about Russian, not about Ukrainian or anyone else's bloodshed. They care about money and the power to keep it. So I think what Prigozhin has signalled the beginning of, I'm a strong guy, I stared you down, and now he will go. If he can do a deal, for example, with Gazprom, the big company which has 50,000, a private army of 50,000, add the Wagner 25,000 of that, you've got 75,000 soldiers like that. Get another couple, it's like the old Labor Party in New South Wales, the factional deals. If I can get 3 votes from there and 4 from the centre-left and 3 from the right, I can stitch together a ministry. Same thing happening, except it's basically happening in a gangster state.
But Yevgeny Prigozhin is meant to be in exile in Belarus, isn't he?
Well, we don't know where he is. I mean, that's part of the fascination, is all the main characters from the weekend. There he is, he's being sort of hailed as a hero, leaving Rostov-on-Don. That's the last we've seen of him. Where is Yevgeny Prigozhin right now? Where's Vladimir Putin? Where is General Gerasimov, the head of the army? Where's the Defence Minister Shoigu? Talk about sort of disappearing gangsters. I mean, where are all these gangsters? I mean, this is a mafia battle going on at the top of the Kremlin, led by the mafia-in-chief, Vladimir Putin, and we don't know where any of them is. So the situation is so fluid that I'm sure they're all plotting and planning how to get each other.
So how does this affect what's going on in Ukraine? I suppose the immediate effect is that the Wagner troops aren't there anymore. They fought on the Russian side, of course, originally. So what proportion of Russia's army were made up of the Wagner troops, and what those forces like
Well,
now?
the Wagner troops are the shock troops, Russia's shock troops. They are the front line, the first wave. They've lost that first wave now, and we can already see what's happening right now in Bakhmut. Clearly the Ukrainians are pushing in there, part of their surge. They're taking advantage of this in the last few hours. They say they've taken 1 kilometre of tunnels in Bakhmut, which I don't think they would have taken if Wagner had been there. There was a standoff in Bakhmut. Wagner had basically taken Bakhmut. With them gone, Ukraine is trying to take Bakhmut now, which would be a huge symbolic defeat. I think that the Russians are now cranking up. While that chaos was happening over the weekend, Russians, the soldiers on the front line, cranked up attacks on Ukraine. 50 or so missiles fired over the Saturday-Sunday period. When I was in Kyiv a few weeks ago, a bad day was 20-25 cruise missiles, most of them being shot down with the air defence. Kyiv's the best protected city in the world at the moment. It's got US Patriot systems and they all get shot down, but the debris then falls somewhere, and that's what's killing people. And I think that the Ukraine will be preparing. I think their next big offensive will be towards Crimea. Again, we talked earlier, if they get the F-16s, and I think they'll be expedited now, I think there'll be a big push to get them in there. I think they'll then try to take Crimea. That'll be the big jewel in the crown.
But if Prigozhin takes over Russia, what's his attitude towards Ukraine?
Look, he's a fighter. He doesn't lose battles. I mean, he walks into their military headquarters on Saturday without a shot fired. He's not used to losing. He wouldn't want to. In a way, I think Putin is bad, but I think in some ways Prigozhin will be even more hardline. And of course, they're all watching the United States. In Ukraine, they're all petrified, many of them, that Donald Trump will be re-elected, because they think if that happens, then he'll pull all the resources out and Russia will take Ukraine.